Steep is a game about exploring a mountain. Simple as that. The way in which you choose to explore the mountain is up to you, whether that be alone, with friends, by ski, board, or sky. Being so focused on exploring, there really is no need in Steep to be getting your adrenaline pumping the way the trailers and promo material would have you believe. Though that extreme stuff is still there for those who want it, the mountain you travel upon doesn't have a timer or score you need to reach. It's just there for you to find new areas and paths to enjoy.
I have to get closer to it. Gotcha.
First, we need to give this game the proper past due review treatment, examine all of its facets, and discuss the quality of the game's modeling, lighting, level design, and more. I'll start where I always do, with animation quality.
That's one for the history books.
For as much shit as I love to give Ubisoft, their games have had a history of amazing animations. It's never mattered what studio worked on the game, and Steep is no exception, especially considering how all the character models have realistic proportions. It's uncanny how natural the animations still feel. We watch real people all the time. We know how they move and are more critical of their movements. Combine that challenge with having the strange ways their bodies behave while wearing constrictive boots or clothing, mounted to a board or skis, the animators had a really big hill to climb in order to get all these animations right. But every walk cycle, idle animation, backflip, front flip, and fist pump show an incredibly confident understanding of motion. There aren't all that many great poses that stick out, but that's clearly intentional. The focus here is making sure those key poses blend more seamlessly with the overall movement. Being able to make these models move in such a way without tumbling down the uncanny valley is truly a remarkable achievement. Speaking of character models, these character models aren't offensive in any way, but they aren't particularly special either. They are, however, a great vehicle for the many customization options made available. All the clothes and accessories are where the texture artists really get to show off their chops. The gear is also modeled quite well despite many of the accessories clipping through clothes quite often. But as far as the actual character models go, there really only appears to be a difference in body meshes, one male and one female. The only other major difference between the 6 riders you can play as are the head models. But again, the customization options made available here all look great on the trail and are a much bigger focus than the body or facial rig. I have a hard time determining what the best aspect of this game's art assets are. The two I can never pick a winner between are audio and lighting. Usually lighting on a scale this large would tank performance or look cheapened by localized lighting being prioritized over shadows and the like. But here, the Alps look nearly photorealistic no matter what time of day you choose to ski under. The way light glistens off the snow ties in nicely with the way powder looks when under shadow or in the baking sun. The development team may have picked a daunting task for their modelers as their first game, but seeing as how the Alps can be spotted from their offices, they ended up being the best team for the job.
So yeah, we are basically 30 minutes away from first mountain range, so we can go skiing and snowboarding over the weekend. We have a Tuesday night skiing session with the team also.
It turns out that when you visit the Alps nearly every weekend to go skiing with your office buddies, you get a pretty good idea on how to model a mountain or two. But don't think they fell into the realism over fun trap. The developers themselves even stated how they did not prioritize having a map-accurate representation of the topography of the Alps, and instead focused on designing a beautiful world that was fun to explore.
We wanted to do something as close as possible to real life, as close as possible to the Alps, but that meant making compromises for us, because of course doing a full representation wasn't maybe as interesting in a video game, as all parts of the mountain need to be fun to play. So I would say that was one of the major challenges for us in the game, finding a sweet spot between having a real and realistic mountain, but it is at the same time fun to play everywhere.
Snow has never looked this great in a game. The way it perfectly parts to every subtle touch and creates snowballs that pile up while you carve powder is superb. The biggest negative I can say about the game's particle effects is that many of them, powder on the ground excluded, are a little commonplace. But I understand the need to sacrifice some effect quality in order to achieve better performance. And to be honest, if I have to trade better weather effects for the best damn snow I've ever traversed on outside of a real world scenario, then I can't complain. Audiophiles, this game was made for you. I honestly feel like the audio engineers must have shoveled snow into a truck, drove it back into a giant audio recording studio, brought in some gear, and went to town. Every footstep is met with the pure sound of snow being slowly compressed under the weight. Boards and skis slide over powder as it escapes the pressure by flowing out of the higher side. Never have I heard such natural sounds captured so, well, naturally. And it doesn't end at the gear or equipment's rustling and impactful noises either. The calls from the wild sound just as impressive. You're only doing yourself a disservice if you don't play this game with a pair of high-fidelity headphones. The sound of powder being broken up in my path may be one of the most trance-inducing things I've heard in years. You can't help but feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and relaxation while playing this game. There isn't a nice enough art asset in the world, though, that could save a game if it didn't play well. So let's jump into the meat of what really makes Steep, Steep. I really wasn't expecting any kind of depth from this game, but Steep does manage fairly well at managing 5 different modes of travel through its world. Because as I said, this is a game about exploration, so let's talk about all the tools Steep gives you to do just that. Obviously the focus on the game was put in these 2 modes, and while their controls are very similar, there are some subtle differences. So let's talk about the similarities. First off, the game is much more like Skate than Amped or SSX. What I mean by that is there is a bigger focus on control over the board or skis, and less focus on the character on top of the board. A controller's left analog stick will control the front of the board, while the right stick controls the rear. So you need to be able to move both in the correct direction relative to what you're trying to do. Your right trigger primes your character to jump when held, and jumps when released. Obviously, this brings the character into a state where tricks and flips can be attempted, and the sticks and triggers change slightly to reflect this. The important thing to do, though, is make sure you manage both ends of the board at the start and end of a jump, or succumb to one of the most common activities you'll encounter in Steep, crashing and falling. Don't feel overwhelmed by those controls though. They really are truly easy to learn and hard to master. My first thoughts about this system was that clearly this would lead to horrible camera angles since you never get to control the camera while on the board. But surprisingly, after nearly 20 hours of play, I have never run into a single camera issue in any of the game's modes. For those of you who do want to get your adrenaline pumping, you'll probably find that this is the best method for doing so. Not much complexity to the controls in this mode, just the use of the left stick to control direction and speed, with the right stick for quick dodging left or right. It's where you choose to start gliding that makes this mode and the level design really stand out. The wingsuit is great for traveling quickly from one point to another as well. As long as you don't need to go uphill, it will work wonders for you. But of course, it's more than tempting to find a rocky cliff or tree-crowded area to traverse through. And it's in those areas you will find yourself trying to beat the game's challenges, or just challenge yourself. Speaking of going uphill, this is the mode that was made for that. In addition to being the most relaxing and easiest mode of travel, paragliding is the only one that can use winds from the mountain to gain height and reach places you may not be able to otherwise. Its major downfall is that it's hard to be kind of accurate about where you're going, especially when landing. But nothing else really comes close to being able to float high above the gorgeous landscapes of the world below. This fifth method of travel tends to have much less use than the previous 4, and is certainly the slowest. But if you ever get stuck in a weird spot or need to reach the top of a hill that's too close for paragliding, walking does the trick. Hell, maybe you even had enough extreme sports for the day, but you still want to hang around in the world and take a look at its glorious vistas. These modes can be accessed at any time with the press of a button. No messy menus or convoluted control schemes. All of these systems present a fairly comprehensive place for you to explore the world in, unlock new aesthetic gear from challenges, and discover where your favorite mountain pass is. Speaking of the mountain, the developers really went all out on making sure the 4 main methods of travel are applicable to anywhere you can find yourself. The team here went to great lengths to ensure that fun paths won over authentic embodimentism. The level design in Steep, while based off the Alps the team lives by, is by no means an accurate recreation of the mountain region. Instead, the developers made the right call by ensuring the game had well-crafted areas you can navigate in interesting ways. I would definitely prefer fun mechanics over a true representation of the Alps.
I am nature's heart of darkness, the monstrous menace of man. I've turned dreams into nightmares, and hope into despair with my haunting and deadly landscapes. You dare.
Yeah, I bet you must be just as surprised as I was to learn this game had anything resembling a story, let alone something as existential and reflective as the narratives within Steep. This is where the comparisons to games like Journey or Abzu come into play. The mountain stories are usually specific stories or tales from the spirit of the mountain, often told from the perspective of a specific mountain summit. They are told to you with excellent narration as you ski, board, glide, or even walk along to a point or points of interest in the area.
Peak of the damned, and I am angry that my once gleaming winter sports palaces now lie rotting and deserted.
Sometimes you are to follow or accompany an apparition who either represents the mountain or someone who rode the path long ago. All of these stories are both great standalone 10 to 15 minute adventures, as well as unique pieces of history that help build out a greater familiarity with the terrain than you would find in any other sports game. Like a lot of games designed for controllers, the way you navigate the map and menu is abysmal without a mouse. Thankfully, the game does seamlessly switch between a controller or mouse and keyboard just by using one or the other and will instantly switch to it. That huge detail aside though, the menus are generally well laid out, with only a few strange hiccups in the workflow from menu to menu. Unfortunately, one of those hiccups is in the way you manage your cosmetic gear and riders who wear them. You would think that since your reward for getting silver and gold medals tends to be this equipment, that it would be imperative to make sure accessing and equipping these rewards would be fast and simple. Nope. Instead, it's quite backwards for something that you'll want to access quite often. Working your way around the map also requires a mouse to not feel like you're poking at holes in the dark. And even with a mouse, it certainly isn't the most intuitive system for looking at the world or fast traveling. You will get used to it though, but just because you can become familiar with the way something works doesn't mean it couldn't function better. Despite having a few major issues in the map and menu systems, Steep truly is a gem of a game that deserves to be remembered. As I said earlier, even if this game was nothing but mountain stories, I would be giving this game a glowing recommendation. Add in the incredibly thoughtful level design, varied game modes, and the countless challenges, you end up with a game that really does have something for everybody. Or if you're like me, you'll end up learning to love just about everything you can do in its own right. Some days, I just want to find a sunny slope and cruise down it at my speed, and other days I want to try to dive through as many cliffs as I can in a wingsuit. In a world where we hardly ever see skiing and snowboarding games, if we see them at all, it's refreshing to see one that really carves out a name for itself, while still delivering on what fans of this nearly ancient genre would enjoy. Obviously, I think this game needs more love than it's getting. Ubisoft may take a risk by funding smaller games that are kind of unique and interesting, but it doesn't take a lot of risk with their big AAA titles, and Steep's low sales is the reason why. But it really is no fault of the game or its developers. I like to reward good work and unique ideas, so of course, I want to reward Steep. Play it, try it if you can, and I'll see you on the mountain.